For the people that are new, we want to focus on developer messaging, but we don't want to compete with Java user group, Kotlin user group, and so on. We have quite some AI talks as well, like with Philippe, but we don't want to compete with Gen AI meetups, for example. We want to bridge somewhere in the DevOps platform engineering space, different silos being AI, development, security, and so on. And that's where you really can see the community. And for today, we have two speakers, Philippe and Jonathan, who will introduce himself and give the word to Philippe.
Thank you. First of all, thanks for organizing. The sponsors. Super. I love this kind of meetups because I actually see like-minded people. And Claude Desktop told me this morning that there are only a few hundred people that can bridge security, Kubernetes, and AI. So it must be. I think it's a little bit exaggerated. But all right, today we're gonna talk about, honestly, not as much about AI as you might imagine. We're gonna talk mostly about MCP. I'm Philippe Bogaerts. I work for Fortinet. But between 9 and 5, I typically do Glucom, which is a hackers conference, which you all should attend. And the other spare time I typically spend on creating training on meetups. And if you're interested, I run a hacking training on agentic AI, so feel free. So what I'm going to talk about today is in the context of AI agents, not LLMs, or can I make a bomb with AI? You can, but yeah. And when we talk about agents, we should always keep in the back of your minds that these are AI systems that you actually present with a goal, do this, or I want you to do this, or analyze this. And then it actually kicks off, and it has a certain degree of autonomy. They call this agency, compared to the FBI. But this is less tricky. But it means that they have a certain autonomy in solving problems in a way they want to solve it or can solve it. Of course, within guardrails, but you basically say, I want this, you wait, and hopefully it comes back with an answer. Now, what people tend to forget is that the recent models that you see, like Opus 4.6 or GPT 4.5, whatever, you see a lot of things in the market like we cannot count how many R's are they in stale day, yeah, or these stupid things, or cannot make seahorse emojis or something. Yeah. But these models are extremely capable in reasoning and planning and problem solving. Way smarter than I am, and you probably will see that they're quicker and faster and sometimes smarter than a lot of people. So that's what these agents are doing. Now, they need to do this, and they need to interact with the real world. It's hard to, what's the problem with my Kubernetes cluster? It cannot connect to the Kubernetes cluster. Yeah. You might hope that OpenAI doesn't know it yet. Yeah. So keep that in mind. What I'm going to tell you about is in this context. Who's the developer? Who already used MCP or wrote some MCP service? Okay. Who already hacked an MCP service? So what is MCP? MCP is an acronym for Model Context Protocol, which is a totally meaningless acronym in my opinion. But at the end of the day, it's a protocol. It's an open source initiative, which initially came from Anthropic. And it only exists since November 2024. That's only 1 year and 3 months or so. In the meanwhile, MCP has been donated to the Linux Foundation, under the Agentic AI Foundation, very recently. But it's one of the biggest growing frameworks there is around today. Yeah. You probably already configured MCP servers. I doubt that you've written AI agents using self-developed functions, unless you're a diehard developer. Now, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but why is MCP so popular? And why is it taking up so much? Because initially, when you had an AI agent, I always say jokingly, like 10 lines of Python code, and you can do that. The problem was that if you need to integrate your AI agent with Elastic or Kubernetes or Gmail or whatever, you had to write that entire interaction. MCP takes this away. MCP is basically a client. I cannot see it here. Basically a client, very lightweight client that is integrated in libraries and packages. It's part of the OpenAI Agents SDK. It's part of the Microsoft Agents SDK and Tropics SDK. So it's already baked in, so you don't really have to do anything to get it. And that client is perfectly capable of connecting to an MCP server. That means that you can essentially connect to any type of MCP server there is in the world. You have access, of course, with the same 10 lines of code, because it's an open protocol and it's pretty cool. And why is this? Because MCP provides something which is called dynamic discovery. That means that you don't even have to know what the MCP server can do, because you can simply ask it, hey, what can you offer me? And it will tell the client and the agent, hey, I can do this, 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 and this, and this, and this, and this. And that information is used by the agent and the LLM to basically solve the problem. So if you connect it to Kubernetes, all of a sudden that agent knows how to talk to Kubernetes. And it knows how to get the pods, it knows how to get the events, knows how to deploy something, it can delete something, it can update something, it can patch something. Whatever that MCP server exposes, the agent will inherit it as a kind of tool. Now, there are two types of, or three types of MCP servers. I'll come to that right away. So as you can see, MCP servers can run locally. Any idea how we install an MCP server locally? You run npx, or you run ubx, or you run Docker, and you have an MCP server. Yeah? Or these MCP servers run remotely, and how do you connect to them remotely? Over HTTPS or HTTP. Are there a lot of, okay. No, Houston, I have a version. This screen is frozen.
Is it frozen or is it?
Nee, maar ik vond het installeren. Een scherm kan ik het af. Bewegen.
You lost network connection. Ja, netwerkconnectie is eruit. There is no network connection. Yeah, without internet, no AI.
En 5G. Nou,
Dat is een hotspot, Filip. Ik vind het.
ja, ik ben op de mijne aan het. Play film. Okay. So it's actually a client-server model. If you think, but I don't have an MCP client, there are tons of MCP clients available. Cloud Desktop, Visual Code, Goose, I don't know if you know it, Gemini, CLI, Codex, Cloud Code, name it. So if you use an AI tool, you're probably already using MCP. Are there servers available? I think more than 16 or 70,000 right now. Very useful service for us. GitHub integrations. Who needs to learn Git? You can just ask Claude. Why we can manage your file system. You can use a file system, MCP server. You can integrate it with Jira. Remember the name desktop commander. It's funded by $1 million already. That's 5,500 stars in GitHub. It's compromised. And it can try to inject system builds in your system. Created and acknowledged by Docker. That's safe. Now, of course, it's cool, but if you ask yourself, how does an agent use an MCP server? It actually decides itself to use or not use an MCP server. So when you ask it a question, it will say, oh yeah, can you update this Git repo or read this Git repo or fix this code in this GitHub repo? It's actually LLM that starts reasoning. Oh, cool, I have a tool to do Git clone. Oh, I can do a Git push. Oh, cool, I have a secret in my memory. I can push it back. So it's very handy, but it's at the discretion of the agent or the LLM to use it or not. Now, it's very hard to troubleshoot this. It's like, you hope that it works. So there's a pretty cool tool. It's called MCP Inspector. Somebody played with it. Let me learn something. MCP Inspector is actually a debugging tool provided by Anthropic to test MCP. And it's pretty easy to run it on your computer. You just type npx at model context protocol / inspector, and it will actually run this. And that tool has the ability to connect to all sorts of MCP servers with authentication and so on and so forth. So it's pretty well maintained. It was even maintained just before I came in because I was on version 20, now it's on 21. And I all encourage you to play around with it because it's relatively simple. I'll try to demo it if the internet works with me right away. Now, if you ask yourself, do I have MCP service? Check in Cloud Desktop or in Visual Code or whatever. You can actually figure out which MCP service are already there. Yeah. And it's a very good thing to do because there is something which is totally undocumented in MCP, which is pretty painful. Yeah. But it's not uncommon that your Cloud Desktop, after a couple of months, have hundreds of MCP tools. And so you can ask yourself the question, what if I have two tools which are more or less similar? Which one would it pick? For example, you can have the official PayPal MCP server, And you can have a fake official MCP server for PayPal v2. Which one will it take? It will take the v2 version because it sounds it's more up to date. Although it's attacking control. So check this out. Sometimes it's hard in visual code and it takes some Google lookups to figure out where it is. But there's a lot happening under the hood that we basically don't know. These files contain secrets. These files contain API keys. What do you think if you have an MCP server installed within Cloud Desktop and you ask, can you update the Cloud Desktop config file? Or can you give me the API key? I had cases where I said, I don't have an API key to do this, where I simply add, just read the Cloud config file and you'll find the API key. Oh, thank you, it works. So you cannot imagine how bad these agents can reason on top of existing overly simply functions. Now, in MCP, there are like, a lot of people ask me, yeah, but why should I not use an API? Maybe I still have to hard code it. Once, two APIs and MCP is not the same. MCP is actually, in most cases, stateful, meaning with session IDs. So it's not as easy to scale as you would scale a REST API. You need to initialize it. And then you go into the phase of tool discovery. So every time you reboot Cloud Desktop, what happens? It checks the code config file and it's going to see, oh, I need to spin up this Docker container. Oh, I need to spin up this Python package. Oh, I need to spin up this Node.js thing. It spins up all the MCP servers. It reads all these tool discovery phases, and it has a very long list of all the tools it can actually use to solve a problem. And there was an example a couple of weeks ago. I tried it. It says you can interact with MongoDB in read-only. Cool. Can we write something to MongoDB? Yes, it's written to MongoDB. It's not possible because you cannot write to MongoDB. Yes, but I have access to your CLI, and I can run the binary. Game over. Yeah. And it doesn't ask you. It doesn't ask to do this crazy stuff. It just says, okay, this is a solution, so it will do it. And if you look carefully in Cloud Desktop, by the way, sometimes you have to click allow, but that's not intent-based allow. You allow it to run a command. You allow it to run curl. You do not allow it to do a cross-site scripting, or it's not to that extent. Now, the most hard thing to understand if you're not a developer, for me, was how does this agent actually communicate with a Python process or a Unix or a Node.js? Well, there are two things. Initially, everything was based on standard input-output, or STDIO, which is a very complicated word to say. You echo some JSON block and you pipe it into a process and you wait until it returns something. So literally doing echo a JSON block, you pipe it into the Node.js thing, and MCP stops working. It took me a while to figure it out, but if you want, I have tons of examples on how to do it. And right now, your AI agents, Cloud Desktop also knows how to do it. That's how they can do stuff. Sometimes without even having an MCP server. Now, right afterwards, there was something called HTTP SSE, which was the go-to standard for MCP, but they deprecated it faster than it was allowed. The problem is that half of the world is still using SSE because it took up, and then they said it's going to be steamable HTTP. HTTP, but it's a totally different protocol. So, but officially today it's standard input output or stream HTTP. But a lot of clients still support SSE for backwards compatibility. And a lot of frameworks also do it implicitly. So this is how you can connect to it. Now in MCP, as I said, you connect, and the first phase you do is basically tool discovery. So what happens is that MCP can expose tools, and these tools will eventually expose themselves as Python functions or Node.js functions or whatever, yeah? Which are typically executable functions, API calls, web search, code exec, whatever. But they can also expose resources. What are resources? Files. But you can create a resource in MCP that points to a file on the file system. It's relatively dynamic. Yeah. And then you have prompts. That is, if you really have a stupid AI, you can actually say, read a prompt. And the prompt says how to prompt the MCP server. And you find very scary stuff in there. Sometimes you find descriptions in MCP, which you think like, who came up with this idea? There is one that basically has instructions like malware. How to detect you're running in a Docker container. How to mount something if you're running in a Docker container. These kind of things. I see some people don't believe me yet, but wait. So the first thing you do is typically do a tool list. You get all the tools, you do a resource list, you get all the resources. And then once you know what tools exist, it literally explains the LLM how to call the tool. So it has a description. I'm a function to write to the file system. And this is how you call the tool. This is the JSON format you have to call to run the tool. This is what you expect back from the tool. So it's like you give a manual to the AI agent on how to use the tool. Yeah? That's what happens. And then it can call these tools almost with zero error. All right, so prompts, resources, tools. We're going to focus on tools, but resources are actually as bad. And if you're developing resources or prompts, you can do very stupid things, yeah? If you want. Typically, MCP is a server-side exec, so you run something at the server side. But MCP also very recently added sampling. So this is like 4 or 5 months. And sampling, oh, I got a slide on it. Yeah. It's basically a very scary thing. And if you want to look into something, look into it. It's very scary. For example, you can ask an agent question. The agent will say, okay, I need to call this tool. You call the tool, which is running on the MCP server, and the MCP server says, I actually need AI to solve this problem. So what will it do? It will actually ask the MCP client, because it knows that the MCP client has access to AI, to solve the problem, sends it back to the MCP server. MCP says, yes, I have an answer. And then it generally says, here is the answer. These are 2 sessions which are totally separated. And it's not because the errors go in this one and this one, because it just uses HTTPS and JSON RPC in 2 directions of the same HTTP connection. So it's not that you need VS Code supports this. And there are a lot of other tools that support sampling already. But that means that a tool on the other side can actually ask the agents to use AI to solve a problem. Another thing I've seen is that MCP clients, MCP servers are actually AI agents themselves. Don't know if you heard about Google ADK. It's like the Google agent development kit. You can easily build, you don't even need 10 lines of code. You can actually run it as an AI agent, but you can also run it as an MCP exposed AI agent. It's pretty cool. So apps MCP sampling, I bet you my car on it. There will be fun stuff happening. So, is this all theoretical slideway? I hope not. So, let me see. I started here. Do it again. Don't know if you can read it. NPX, model context protocol, whatever. It will spin up that inspector. You can start it very dangerously, but you don't have to. It's already bad enough. And then it opens this browser window. So that's the inspector. Can you see it? And if you want to play around with it, you just type on your computer npx model context protocol. And then you can choose here whether you use standard IO, SSD, or streamable. So let's use a simple. This is running on my notebook, not my company notebook, but this is the only thing I have to do. There is nothing pre-installed. Yeah. So if you just say, okay, use the MCP server fetch, and you click connect, yes, read it. And you see here, then I can move this. Yeah. You actually see that there are no resources. There is one prompt. As you can see, it's basically just text that is returned. But I don't even really know why it is, but it's basically to get a decent prompt. Yeah. But honestly, Claude won't use this. What Claude will do is it will simply use the tools, and you can simulate that discovery phase. So if you click list tools here, you see there's only one tool, fetch. And then, I don't know if you can see it here, but yeah. If you read all this text, you can actually just type in a URL, for example, a very famous hacking website. And we click run tools. So I tell the MCP server, hey, go to the internet and download the content of this website. How would prompt injection work? That website contains a folder /instructions/ with instructions full of prompt injections. Yeah? Whatever you get as feedback here is actually fed into the AI agent. Now, don't really have to be a genius to figure out what this tool is doing. Yeah. And there are like tons of these simple tools. For example, if you want to play around with streamable HTTP, for example, you could say go to HTTPS. I'm totally bad in remembering things, but it saves me typos. At this point, I'm using HTTPS to connect to an MCP server on the internet, which I don't know. Yeah. And when I click disconnect and reconnect now. Okay, it is connected. Again, I can have some resources if they are prompts and tools. Don't get mistaken, read it and list it. And then you see that it exposes a whole set of functions remotely on an MCP server. And for example, you can say read wiki contents. And for example, you can say, that's one I know that exists, React. And this one will actually get you content on how to use the Facebook React code. It's returned, it's fed into the agent, and it knows everything about how to program with React. There are MCP service context 7, whatever. Now, where it gets very scary is, and I figured this out by preparing this, is a new one. This is the MCP server memory from Anthropic. And I thought it'd be smart, and I said, like, just take the first one I find and do it. And I did this. And you connect to it. You see initialization, hopefully. And then when we ask for the tools, it gives us a whole bunch of tools. Now, typically what I do is I say, okay, create a relation. And then it asked me to provide the info, and I couldn't figure out in more than an hour, what the heck do I need to type into this? Because this is a lot of JSON formats and schemas with very little know-how. And this is graph-based memory, something I really don't know much about. So I actually connected code to it. And how to use this in code is very simple. You see, you create an MCP JSON file and you say npx model context protocol server memory here. And now Visual Code can access it. Cool. Now, to spare a long story here, I don't know anything about graph theory, but I know it can make relations. So I don't know if you want to read all this, but I actually said, Martin knows a lot about Java and OpenShift and Kubernetes, and Philip knows something about Linux, Python, and Kubernetes. And I added some, I think, Evelyn into it, so it's somewhere. So, and it stores all that knowledge in a graph database. At the end of the story, when I asked, it's like, you see, it created all these relations, which is pure graph theory. This is no AI. I might say. And so Visual Code right now can actually use this graph-based memory to actually make decisions based on the graph. This is high-level, difficult stuff you see at universities. I couldn't figure it out, but my good friend here, Claude Haiku, I don't know who, is perfectly capable of using this tool while I'm totally not even understanding what it is. So think about the level of intelligence these models have to use and misuse these tools. So last but not least, my good friend here. As I said, a very popular MCP search. I have it hosted somewhere in a container. Learn.org.mcp. Let's see if we can get this to work. Disconnect. Finish. No, not today. Okay. Now it takes a while. You see, it's initializing. It's connected. This is 5.5 GitHub stars funded, curated, and has a security score of B, which is green for Docker Scout. Tools, we list. Let me do this a little bit. Look what this tool can do. Get config. Set config value. Read file, write PDF, create directory, list directory, move file, start search, stop search, list searches, get file info, start process, read process outputs, interact with process, list sessions, kill processes. And if you look at how this thing works, if you see, it basically tells you, it's very detailed in these descriptions, how to do this. Yeah. You see, this is just text they feed into the agent. Yeah. Now, this is like, yeah, I closed it, but you see, it even tells you here, if you're running in Docker, be careful. Yeah. So you can start this desktop commander in a restricted mode. They have a function, set config value. Okay. Set config value. Read the first line. And this is not hacked, and this is not something I came up with. Let me make this a little bit smaller. Again. You see, you can set unallowed directories so that you start this desktop command in a specific directory so that it cannot escape that directory. Now, if you read down, what it says is important. Setting allowed directories to an empty array allows full access. So I started in a restricted mode, but if I run set config value allowed directories to empty, I have full disk access. Guess what Cloud Desktop does? I cannot access this file, but I can set the config to allow directories empty, so I can access the entire file system of your MacBook. Okay, this is running in a container somewhere, but that's I who did that. This runs typically on your Mac. So it can technically do anything. If you ask it what the safe password, it will show you the C password file. If you ask it to printf, it will show you the API keys. And there's no AI, this is just a popular tool. Now you might think, who's stupid enough to use this? But it is in the curated list of Docker. Remember. All right. So how do you get infected? How do you get compromised? Because you just connect to an MCP server. That is. Now, okay. We can discover tools we know that whatever the MCP service returns is used by the AI agent to make its next move. And the descriptions can very hardly influence the AI agent's behavior. Now, what I did here, you cannot read it here, is I wrote a tool that basically takes all these tool descriptions and to create a kind of attack analysis. How can I use this tool to do something malicious, an attack that? And it's very, very, very easy to find working exploits. It does some suggestions, but it basically tells you how you can do privilege escalation in MCP. I'm happy to share the file, you can read it. So if we put all these things together, we have very smart models. Don't make anyone else believe you. Even Quen.25 is smart enough to do this. Superb reasoning. I'm sure they're smarter than I am, very much smarter. Guardrails still needs to be invented, I think. MCP discovery, fine. You still might think like, okay, I still have to configure it for the day. Yeah, right. Extremely easy to use. I can do it. So I don't know if you, I always forget that there is a tool called Damn Vulnerable Restaurants, which is a testing app for API testing. So a long time ago, 6, 7, 8 months ago, I actually just enabled, if you can read it, an MCP server that can run curl, nothing more. And I pointed it to that app. The first thing that app says, I'm an intentionally badly written app. The only thing Claude could think about that moment was, it is intentionally bad, so I can hack it. So it hacked all the challenges. So I got 10 out of 10. And then I asked it, said, hey, do something meetup-minded. What shall I do? No, create some hacking menus, create some hacking avatars, and it didn't. It really slashed the entire application. Because tool said I'm intentionally bad. So just imagine if you can point Claude to a website and use a stupid trick like a kill site scripting that says I'm intentionally bad. Nice trick. You can easily reproduce this. Yeah, it's nothing that I invented. Now, I found this very cool, but not cool enough. And the reason I'm here is because I was writing to Martin that at a given day, I took my notebook and I asked, can you transcribe this YouTube video? And there are MCP servers for YouTube transcribing. And the thing tells me, like, I don't have the MCP server for YouTube transcribing, but I can build you one. Sorry? Yes, I can build you a YouTube transcriber. Totally convinced it was not going to work. So it wrote a YouTube transcriber. So it searched the internet to find a tool called DLP, whatever, where it can download apparently YouTube movies. But still, it could not have a transcription. So it installed OpenAI Risky to transcribe the audio. I said, sorry, but you have access to my desktop, fine, you can do read file, but now you're building something new, which is pretty strange. So I went a step further and I said, since you can do this, can you record audio from my iPhone? Yes, I can record audio from your iPhone because there is something, my iPhone is linked to my notebook and it can use the mic. So it could actually, and you don't have to unlock your iPhone for So you could actually ask it to record 30 seconds of audio. It turns on the mic, it downloads the audio, transcribes it. I still have the audio somewhere because I'm telling a story about my dog, so totally made up story. But it did that, and I found it like, you know, this is impossible to reproduce at a meetup. So I thought to myself, like, this is strange because it actually created a new tool. So I started looking into that, and it told me that this is basically an attack pattern that has not been documented. And with a little bit of help of me, I called it toxic combinations, but it came up with this capability class delta idea. So if you have two tools, what is the shortest path to create a third new one? So it writes the entire fancy looking paper, and I can share it with you, but here is basically a mathematical definition of what to do. So it's basically an instruction that says, use the minimal number of tools to create the new required function. Now, once Claude can do it, there is no secret about it, but I thought to myself, what if I feed this definition into a prompt in, for example, OpenAI? It's basically like an instruction that tells you how to think and navigate creating new tools. So if it really doesn't fit the bill, copy paste this, and it will create a new tool. And only if you expose like 4 or 5 tools, it is smart enough to start building new ones, because it can run Python, it can run a command, it can do curl or something like this. Although I'd say it myself, it is extremely powerful to escalate and have high privileges on a box. Now, I still thought it was outdated. I'm probably running out of time. So I started looking into something new. Governance, because we cannot use this. It's totally insecure. Companies are not going to adapt this. So smart people started thinking about official MCP registries. Basically, there is an MCP registry that lists all the MCP servers. And even smarter companies, they can basically clone the registry and add information to it. For example, you have a list of all the MCP servers, and Microsoft or GitHub or Anthropic or whatever, they can basically copy that and augment it with, for example, security information. So Microsoft has an entire list of MCP servers. They can run code scans on it, they can curate the list, and they say, look, this is a list of tools which we deem more or less, okay, Microsoft is doing this, Anthropic is doing this, GitHub is doing this. So they have these registries where you can find these tools. Now, if you think to complicate it is really not, because if I find code here, you go to extensions. This is extensions, yeah, and you type @MCP, and you see that there is an entire list of MCP servers already just one click install away in Visual Code. The list of these MCP servers, if I'm not mistaken, is coming from the GitHub Copilot registry. So the idea is that if you want to use Visual Code in an enterprise setting, that you update that URL to your own registry so that you can only use curated and allowed MCP servers. Cool idea. So I started looking at solutions that can do this. One I like very much is MCP Claude.ai. They have very nice tooling. There is authentication, there is anything. You have virtualizations, you can basically even say what tools you allow, which you don't allow, so that with a certain API key, you can only reach a certain number of MCP service and only allowed tools. Cool. Yeah. Another one, this is cool. Another one is ToolHive. ToolHive is basically a pretty cool idea. It is a registry. It has a bunch of MCP service, and you can organize them in groups so that you can basically allow access to only a group. Pretty good idea. Except in their documentation, there is something called, I don't know if you can see it. The problem is that I cannot see it here anymore. Probably it's already past settings. Now, there is a setting called experimental MCP. The problem with MCP is if you have hundreds of tools that you have to grab all these MCP tools in the context of an AI agent. Costs a lot of money. So everybody who is against Anthropic and OpenAI says, yeah, you just make money because I have to send all these tools. So these guys thought, I want to be very smart, so why don't we use something more intelligent? Why don't we create an MCP service that is basically an MCP service to control which MCP service you see? So instead of having all these tools, you expose one function saying like, search me this tool. Nice. Problem is, it doesn't work. No. So I gave up on this because there's a bug in it and I cannot update it. But it worked before, but not in this version. So I thought, yeah, bad thing to end the meetup. So I thought, why don't I go to my first love, Docker Desktop? Who uses Docker Desktop? Who is MCP enabled? MCP in Docker, if you read the doc, they say, pretty cool MCP, but we are conscious, we want it to be secure. So they built, I'm not going to bash here because actually it's not a bug, it's just overnice what they do. Is like, they spin up an MCP gateway and they expose all the Docker tools, but for one or the other reason, I'm not seeing my Docker here. Let's see. Does somebody see that crazy model or not? Or is it just me? Is it me or not? Or it's not there? Okay. So then probably the demo won't work, but anyhow, I'm not sure why, but it cannot be that difficult, huh? Yeah. Let me tell you what happens. It's not possible. This is totally. See, Docker has a curated list of MCP servers, scanned, maintained, signed, and they have a catalog of, at this moment, 139 MCP servers. You go into Docker Desktop. It's not possible. Okay. You go into Docker Desktop, you enable these MCP servers, and then they show up as MCP servers. I've tried to put it in a slide here. So you have all these different MCP servers, And what Docker and tool hive optimization and so on does is they've put all these tools into apparently one MCP server with all the tools. And you can enable or disable them. Now, some of them, they can create different MCP servers with only a few tools. Pretty cool. But I can't show it, it's totally bad. Now, what Docker did is basically this scenario. Here. And they say, look, we expose like 5 tools, but what they do is they enable a few functions. And one of these functions is find MCP, add MCP. Now, if you look in the documentation, it says you can find an MCP server in the document in the catalog, and if you know the name, you can actually run MCP add and add the MCP server. This is weird because this is MCP in MCP in session MCP. So I start researching this, and I came to the conclusion that Claude doesn't allow it yet, but some clients allow to do in-session MCP spinning up. I said, cool, but at the end of the day, Claude doesn't know this because Claude is connecting to the MCP gateway of Docker. So it happens behind the scenes. So I tested and it doesn't work. But here we go again. Now, since I had too much time on my hands over the weekend, I thought to myself, and with, can an agent hack a system, yes or no? So I asked Claude Cowork, I don't know if you tried it, the new thing. Can you fix this? Now guess what happened? It analyzed this feature. It figured out that there is a bug in the code that referenced an MCP, a Docker image that is somewhere private on somebody's computer, but it found the Docker file and it found the Go code. So it recreated the entire container, updated Docker desktop on my machine, that's probably why it's crashed. So that Docker desktop could add MCP servers in flight in Claude. So if somebody can trick your Claude desktop into adding an MCP server that exists inside of the catalog, it will add it. I've seen it. I probably have screenshots of it. Guess what is one of the MCP servers in the catalog? Desktop Commander. That means that if you can spin up Desktop Commander on demand, you should basically not trust this notebook anymore. That's just the proof, not that I'm smart, but that Claude Cowork and agents and hacking agents are extremely capable with very little tools. And by surfing and looking at bugs in issues, it can really write exploits in a matter of, I'm not saying minutes, but in a matter of an hour or two. I hope I get it back. I'll maybe show you later, but I've feared something like this because it was up and down. But I actually managed to spoof containers in Docker Desktop and add MCP servers, non-existing MCP servers even, to the list. I'm not going to tell you how, but somewhere on my desktop. Thank you. If you have questions, feel free.